Hello, I'm in a moderately sized town in southern China. Walking through the yet-to-be city, I see evidence of a famine firmly gripping the soft necks of the people. Suddenly, from the heavens they come. 5 men dressed in LGBT garments descend from the clouds on 5 goats, gifting the village's inhabitants sacks of rice and a single bottle of Coke Cherry. Inexplicably, they go on to petrify the goats and stack them up on the market square before disappearing into the clouds again. Why is this relevant in any way? It isn't, though. This is a myth originating from Guangzhou, a city with a very large Cantonese population, which may or may not coincide with the alternate name for Guangzhou being Canton, but I digress. Point is, Gaming is supposedly Cantonese, though I'm neither Cantonese nor in any way, shape or form knowledgeable in the nuances of Chinese ethnicity, so let's just leave it at that. With the Lantern Ride 4-star selector and the release of Sitlali, Gaming is somewhat relevant, and because I can't think of anything else to do while I'm waiting for 5.4, I will attempt and subsequently fail to review him today. Gaming is of course a Claymore Pyro on-field carry. His normal attacks are quite unremarkable, their multipliers are somewhat in the range of what you'd expect from a 4-star Claymore user, but since you're not really building specifically for their damage, their lack of damage isn't a huge problem. Then moving on, off the edge of a cliff, we've got his elemental skill, which can be summed up with the following. You press it to dash forward, and upon slamming your cranial vessel into either an enemy or a wall, which also includes small ledges, pebbles, and of course the ozone and nitrogen oxides in the air, you jump upwards, enabling you to then plunge back down, consuming 15% of Gaming's HP while also dealing pyro damage at talent level 9, roughly 390% of his attack. Now, 390% attack doesn't, at least for an ability with a 6-second cooldown, sound amazing, but it very much is. Very importantly, Gaming's skill doesn't have ICD and is quite slow, meaning that he's the only pyro DPS that can reliably react all of his damage, but I'll talk about that in a bit. And while that's nice and all, the cooldown would, if left to its own devices, result in a situation similar to Dory, by which I mean he would vanish from our collective consciousness. But since I don't even know how I started a segment comparing Gaming to something that doesn't exist, let's get his burst. Upon activation, it deals an initial bit of damage and summons Banshai, the bestest of boys, who moves towards Gaming and upon linking up with him, restores Gaming's skill cooldown. Now, the actual speed at which your skill is refunded can vary widely, as Banshai, well, a good boy, has significant airtime, like an elderly person tumbling down a set of stairs in the retirement home, meaning that if you just use your boost and then spam plunge E, you'll have to wait quite a while for Banshai to get to you. Luckily, there are 2 ways to remedy this issue. The mechanically easier one to execute requires Sanyun and C6 Bennett. Since your normal attacks are pyro infused, you can alternate between E plunges and Sanyun plunges. The problem with this tech is that since you're playing pyro way more often than usual, having your pyro aura overtake the hydro or cryo aura is a serious problem. If you are for some reason playing Gaming in a mono pyro team, this of course gets way more viable, but in reaction based teams it is not really advised. However, the second strategy is known as juggling. You can, if timed correctly, catch the first monster generated by your boost in mid-air before you do your first plunge, meaning that your E will be refunded mid-air. When you then go on to plunge back down, this plunge will generate the second monster, but since you've already restored your E cooldown before the plunge, that means that you don't have to wait and can cast your skill again and again catch the second Manchai mid-air before you plunge. By repeating this, you can very comfortably get more than 7 plunges. I don't know where I got 7 or more plunges from, as evident from the footage I got 6. I did get staggered, so I might be able to get 7, but yeah. I think 7 is the maximum you can get without some fucking weird ass setups. All of which can easily react, provided your application doesn't run out. Though after 4 or so plunges, that might very well be the case, so you might be tempted to end your rotation and start over. However, the problem with that is that Gaming's boost consumes 60 energy, which can, depending on your team, actually be very difficult to reach. Considering that, it might be worth it to continue your rotation despite all your buffs having run out, just to generate more particles. What I forgot about his passive talents? Well, seems like the design department did too until 3 hours before the deadline, and so his first passive just refunds some of the self-damage from his E, which is fucking useless. Okay, it does have a minor application when used with Farina to get a tiny bit more fanfare, but who actually gives a fuck? His second passive just gives 20 damage percent for his plunge if above 50% HP, which will always be the case because you're playing him with Bennett. quite simple, really. Use Brain Slasher and Vape teams, otherwise any 5-star Static and Serpent Spine are good. Moving on. Okay, no, actually, there's a bit more nuance. Well, that nuance being that if you don't have Brain Slasher, his best free-to-play option is the Tidal Shadow, closely followed by the Ultimate Overlord's Meadow and the Male Flower.
Well, actually,
I wrote this section literally a year ago, and as such, Garming's male teams were significantly less of a factor than they are today, meaning that Brain Slasher is in Garming's best teams fucking shit. In those cases, Male Flower is alright, and Black Glove Slasher is actually pretty competitive as well. Go Marie-Chaussee. I will not elaborate, and I do not need to. Now again, I wrote this about a year ago, and as it turns out, Crimson Witch synergizes perfectly with Garming, and so you can use either set depending on your subset quality and also weapon, as it's obviously quite easy to overcap on crit rate on Marie-Chaussee. For stats, if played in Melt or Vape, generally an EM sense will be better than an attack one, as mentioned he can react all of his damage and is always played with Bandit, further diminishing the value of attack. That being said, if your attack sense quality is significantly higher than your EM sense, you can of course also go for attack. For the Goblet, you obviously want to go damage percent, and lastly a crit damage circlet, though if you have an EM circlet with cracked substats, that might also be worth considering, especially so if you're on Marie-Chaussee and are using a crit damage weapon. When it comes to the relevant substats, there is one that is imperative to Garming: energy recharge. Because, as alluded to, he can have a hard time getting his burst back, at least 120% ER is basically necessary. There are also teams in which 16-second rotations are possible, and in those teams it might be worth to go as high as 140 or 150 ER to achieve these tighter rotations, which will of course increase your DPS, but I'll get to that in the teams section. I don't think the other substats need much exposition, it's the usual of crit, EM and attack. Lastly, talents, which are very self-explanatory. Level his skill first, then his boost, and if you've got some books lying around that you desperately want to rid yourself of, his normal attacks can of course be useful for Shangyun plunging, but as alluded to, it's not really optimal. I want you to imagine this. You're walking through a mine, desperate to find the exit. After fighting your way through an entire village of troglodytes evading mages that can on-site dismember you with an invisible projectile, rushing through a pit of furry cannibals, gently squeezing past ghosts, and defeating whatever the fuck this is, you can see it, the cell that contains the reason for your descent. You wait for the guard to turn around, approach the barred door, and then you hear a crack. Why did I bring this up? Because I need to share my PTSD with someone. Anyways, it's completely unrelated to Garming's teams. Actually getting to them, then you always want to pair him with Bandit, preferably at C6, because even if you're not doing the Shangyun tech, you still get 15% pyro damage bonus. Now, obviously, activating Bandit C6 has been a point of contention pretty much ever since people realized what he does isn't just limited to launching himself off of cliffs, but really, what bad can it do? Make your physical coaching team unviable? What about Yula? Well, as one of the probably 4 people still somewhat regularly playing Yula, I can tell you the following with utter confidence. I don't give a shit, and neither should you. At this point, there are so many teams that are enabled by Bandit's C6, and the ones that are ruined by it are fucking dog shit anyways. By the way, look at this very cool Yula Raiden double carry team. Hoyo, please. Fucking buff Yula, I'm begging of you, please. Moving on to Garming's other teammates though, this is where it gets both interesting and at the same time, it doesn't. Why? Because I lied. The hands down cockeyed balls opposite of Blue best teammates for Garming are Silali and Shangyun, and in most cases it's not even really close. The reason is very simple. Silali massively buffs meld carries with her Res Shred, City and TDDS, and also single-handedly applies enough cryo for Garming to melt every single one of his attacks. As for Shangyun, she can of course also shred Res with BV, though unless you're going for some giga dank setups it won't last too long. Still, she does also provide extra plunging damage and crit rate. Though if you want to play the aforementioned 16-second rotations or just can't be bothered with Shangyun, both Kaza and Shilolan are also very viable. In fact, I personally prefer to play Shilolan just because she's less of a pain in the ass and can proc Phav more easily than Shangyun. Of course, these teammates obviously lock you into Melt, so if you want to play Vape, Verina is the best option for that, and in that case synergizes quite well with Shangyun's team-wide healing. If you have neither Silali nor Farina, Rosaria, Layla and Balls are all okay options for melt. Just be in the know that forward melting instead of rev vaping with anyone but Silali and C6KO will result in your gulping becoming the supreme glizzy guzzler, the way he'll be gulping down on every last crumb of that cryo aura, leaving behind nothing but pain, suffering and a strong desire for a self-administered orgiectomy. Okay, that's it, there are no other teams, let's move on. I almost forgot, there's also mono pyro teams, by which I mean Xiangling teams. How could I forget? Now, I am in no way, shape or form obligated or forced to say this, but yeah, monopyro cleared faster than vape, so yes, well, vape is the better option if you want your garming to make up more than 30% of your party's DPS, if you don't want to get turned into a black bag purge stew with a set percentage chance of instead being turned into a one-min restaurant's boiled fish. I'd suggest to instead play monopyro, at least if you don't have any of the aforementioned premier supports and an underinvested garming. In that honestly not even that unlikely scenario, you could also run gallant or Seesaw for example. Just note that any accidents are unrelated and not covered by your insurance. Also, there's another thing I forgot. I had written a whole other team section about a year ago in another document and forgot about it. But since I firmly believe in the 3 R's of climate sustainability, reuse, reduce and recycle, here's a cut down version of that. Either run a Farina vape team or a mono pyro team, or if you're a real gamer, deranged and beyond reasoning from eating too much ballsack, run him in melt. Either way, he's gonna be carried by multiplicative reactions or characters that are actually good. Just so this section isn't comically short, let's do a review inside this review. Look at this stylish rotation, look at these numbers, ignore the lack of readily available boosts in subsequent rotations because sustainability is for losers. To attain this peak form, we're looking at Bennett C6, ruining my hopes of Euler ever being viable again for good. His job is very simple: boost my attack and provide me with a pyro infusion so my normal attacks can vape whatever monster is currently accelerating towards me, but most importantly, he applies pyro to whichever character is on field, causing said character to get one shot by any enemy that deals hydro or cryo damage, though luckily Abyss reset came early so that's no longer a problem. I didn't say there were no problems, because having 2 different flavors of annelids in 2 successive chambers is not a dick move, it's not even sadistic at this point, it's just a poorly disguised fetish. Though that's not the point, the team is. So we've also got Yelan and Farina, whose purpose is hydro application and damage boosting, though that's what's known as concealment, as in truth they're there to do roughly 60% of the entire party's damage output. Here then is a sample rotation which I've come up with after countless minutes of racking my brain to come to the conclusion that casting skills and boosts in order of their respective durations is pretty much the only thing you have to watch out for. So we start with Farina E into Q, then switch to Yelan to do the same, then Bennett Q into E into Galming, immediately use his boost to catch Bennett's particles and then spam your left mouse button along with E until Bennett's buff expires, at which point you repeat. That is if you have your boosts, which you don't, so run Fav. Honestly, I don't know if it's a good idea to keep this in here considering that, well, there's no 2 fucking team sections, one of which is completely inaccurate and outdated. However, I think that I want the video to be longer to make it seem like I actually bothered doing any sort of in-depth research, so let's move on and pretend like this didn't happen. Now, from everything I've said, you might be of the impression that Garming is a fairly decent character at what he does, and you'd be correct. However, you've also been deceived and lied to, just like a Romanian dad of 4 is tricked into working in the German meat industry, only he doesn't know that. He will not be paid minimum wage. Oh, there's a law seemingly preventing this exploitation of the less fortunate. Don't worry, they'll just get the Dutch to do it instead. Well, my point was originally going to be that Garmin gets a lot better at high constellations, so let's start with his C1, which increases Garmin's self-healing, which is nice for those with the inability to dodge, and more importantly, it makes fanfare gain on Farina even quicker, leading to even higher damage numbers. His C2 gives him 20% attack for overflow healing, which is fine, but nothing special really. For his C3, his skill is enhanced, which compared to his boost or normal attack is of course incredibly good. His C4 gives him some energy back, the usefulness of which heavily depends on the team as I already mentioned. I've got mine at roughly 120 ER and struggle heavily to get my boost back without clear particle drops from enemies, so the C4 is very welcome. But even so, I do very often need to funnel him with a bandit, but since I in return get higher damage per screenshot, I see no problem. In a mono pyro team, his ER requirements should be less of an issue, considering both Xiangling and presumably Kaza generate a ton of energy, especially if Kaza is on Fab as he should be. But in teams without multiple Fab users and or high pyro particle generation, his C4 can be a pretty great thing to have. Then his C5 is kinda and lastly, his C6 is just really fucking good, adding 80 crit value and increasing the AoE of his plunges massively. With this C6, he arguably transcends his status of a 4-star damage dealer and becomes a proper contender for second best pyro DPS. Well, yeah, he's not beating Malvika, but at C6 he is very much competitive with both Aladino and Hu Tao. On my account, my Hu Tao is the best out of the three because her build is fucking broken, and more importantly, I don't have Garming C6 because the last time he was on banner was in 4.7. Now I'm recording this on the 5th of February before the 4 stars on 5.4's banners are known, but I would highly advise anyone capable of deciding the 4 stars on any given banner to do the right thing, because if they don't, they may at one point or another find a finely shaped turd placed in their rice bowl. But I'd digress. So what then is Garming's place in the meta? As mentioned, he is one of the better carries at C6 even among 5 stars, but at C0 he is still very much a cut above the likes of Yang Fei or Ningguang. Considering that, we have to place him accordingly on my objective character tier list. Okay, now no jokes, no fart reverbs out 1 even at C0, which of course can be acquired guaranteed through the event, or at least could. I'd say he is not only fun to play, but honestly better than Risley, and so he is the verified 3rd best character in the hit game, Genshin Impact. Congrats, Garming! I'm sorry. Also, I know I already made that joke last video, shut the fuck up! Okay, now as you might have noticed, either because you were one of the 4 people that actually watched my Mondstadt-Lore video to the end, or just because you paid attention, I started working on this video pretty much exactly 1 year ago during 2024's Lantern Rite. But because I, at the time, wasn't satisfied with the script and my voiceover, I dropped it and decided to work on the lore videos. Well, regardless, I do still want to upload more often, but since a somewhat complete 5.4 review is at least another month away, I decided to revive this one because Garming is now somewhat relevant. Also, I have a Furina video also just sitting here half completed, so I might as well also get that out before the 5.4 review. Subscribe and like, please. I'm sick of the fucking cookie video being my biggest achievement. I hate it. And remember, whenever you walk into a dark room, if you hear a voice, it might already be too late. See you in the next one.